Hello, and welcome back to another episode of This Healthy Life. I am very excited to have Amanda Dahl with me today. Amanda is a holistic health consultant, herbalist, energy medicine practitioner, and after an 18-year journey with Lyme disease and now in remission, she now helps others heal from Lyme and chronic conditions. Amanda and her husband Christopher run the Dahl Holistic Health and work with clients virtually, and I'm so excited to have you here today and share all your wisdom, also some of your personal story, and what led you to open up your health center. So
Sure.
welcome,
Thank you,
Amanda.
Erica. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So let's dive right in. I'd love to have you just kind of introduce yourself and share a little bit about your journey and your story and what got you to where you are
Sure.
today.
So my name is Amanda Dahl, and I came to the holistic health space about 10 years ago when my family and I were diagnosed with Lyme disease. We had been sick off and on for 18 years, had various health things going on. All of us were falling apart in different ways. It was my husband, my son, and myself. And then we were finally diagnosed, and it was like this big light bulb went on, and so many things made sense, of course. If you've ever met anybody in the Lyme space, a lot of us are in that situation. And so I did all the conventional things that people do, went to conventional doctors, wasn't getting the answers that I wanted. And the interesting thing for me is that I'm allergic to so many antibiotics that was never a treatment option for me. And traditionally, that's what the first line of treatment is for Lyme disease. So I had to go outside of the box, and I found naturopathic medicine, started working with a naturopath who was able to do just those unconventional things to be able to treat. I used a lot of herbs, I used essential oils, supplements, and my husband and son ended up following suit because they were trying the more conventional routes and they weren't really getting anywhere. So when we finally we felt like we were starting to reach remission, but we had plateaued, and there was still a couple of things that, during the month, the full moon and the new moon were always rough spots for us. And we were eventually introduced to energy work. We started off with Reiki, and that made a huge difference. After the very first session, I felt like my brain fog was gone. There was no way I could have held a conversation like we're doing now. And when I got off that table, after the first session, it was like a miracle had happened. And then when I was feeling a little bit better, which was just a few months after that, then I started taking Reiki classes myself. I told my husband, you've got to do this because it's amazing. And then one of the doctors in the practice that we were going to for Lyme treatment was watching our journey and contacted me and said, Amanda, are you going to be seeing clients? Because I see how much energy work has been helping you, and I have some clients that are stuck, and I would love for you to work with them. And that was never my intention when learning energy work. I was learning it to help my husband and my son and myself. And then that was like where the door just kind of blew wide open, and learned so many other things. As you probably saw in my bio, I've got quite a list of modalities at this point.
Yep.
And my practice just grew and grew from there.
Awesome. And then, so do you mostly work with clients that have Lyme disease, or do you work with other chronic
I
conditions as
do work
well?
with other chronic conditions. At first, it was mostly Lyme. And then the word spread like, oh, Amanda helped me with this. And then clients were contacting me saying, hey, my mom has this, or, my kiddo has this. Could you help them? And I was like, sure, because energy medicine isn't specific to one diagnosis. So, lots of clients started coming my way, and I work with numerous different health conditions at this point.
Awesome. And so I want to touch a little bit. You mentioned that your husband and your son also had Lyme, which seems to be a common thing.
Yeah,
Sometimes an entire family is affected, or mom passes it in
yeah.
utero. So how did your whole family come about to also having Lyme? Were you all bit by a tick, or like different times and it
Yeah.
came on differently, or what's kind of your
I
experience
don't
with that?
remember being bitten by ticks,
Yeah.
which is so common in this space.
Yep.
But when my husband and I started dating, both of us started to go on this downward spiral around the same time. And, we didn't know that this was going on. So we started a family, and my son was born, and we knew there was something different. And he was later, years later, actually diagnosed with autism. But 3 of the doctors that we consulted with thought it was Lyme-induced autism. And when he was diagnosed, they actually wrote it in the diagnosis report that it would be interesting to reevaluate him after being treated for Lyme disease. And that was part of the puzzle that we were putting together when we looked back, because we hadn't been diagnosed with Lyme at that point. So there was just a lot of
Wow.
things that kind of came into play during this whole journey. And subsequently, when we did treat, a lot of the things that are characteristic of an autism diagnosis did fade away. However, he does still have autism. There's no doubt about it.
Okay.
It doesn't just magically go away, which is okay.
I've heard kind of both sides of that. Like sometimes a lot of people have said that their child was born
Mm-hmm.
autistic or had autism symptoms, and once they started treating for Lyme, a lot of
Yeah,
that went away. So it's interesting. It's amazing that your doctors actually even noted that it could have been Lyme-induced autism, and that led you down that path, because otherwise you probably would have taken a lot longer to find out what was going on
yeah,
with you. And unfortunately, it's such a common story that doctors aren't looking for Lyme, they're not testing for Lyme, they're not even it's not even top of
right,
mind. And I don't know where in the country you're located, but I'm in California. And when I got no one talked about Lyme
right.
out here. And I went 2 years, doctor to doctor, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And it's like, oh, there's no Lyme in California. That's an East Coast disease. And it's
Well,
definitely
the
not.
sad thing,
It's
Erica,
definitely very rampant in
yeah, the sad thing is we were in New England when all of this was going on. We
California.
were in supposedly the most endemic place in the country, and
Hmm.
doctors,
Or doctors should have more
exactly, and they
awareness.
were not picking up on it. And when we were finally diagnosed, we were in New Hampshire, and still, even the naturopath that we were working with there, they were prescribing antibiotics, which we don't typically think of that so much. When we think of naturopaths, we think of herbal medicine and more supplements. And it was when we moved to California in 2014, we were in Southern California, and we were working with a fabulous doctor there. And, she was really thinking outside the box, and she was using essential oils before anybody was talking about it. And she was talking about
Hmm.
mold, and nobody else was talking about mold.
Hmm.
So we felt really blessed that we were connected with this doctor, and I learned so much from her, which, some of those things I carried right into my own practice, because I did eventually get an herbalism certification, and I work with people now to be able to help them with herbal protocols for Lyme and a couple of other conditions.
That's great. And that actually leads me into
Yeah,
my next question. I wanted to kind of talk about you. You have, like you mentioned, like a lot of certifications, a lot of things that you offer at your healing center. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the different modalities and, what success you've had with those
sure.
modalities.
So all of the things that I offer, Erica, are things that were helpful to me, and in our journey. So, there were things that I tried, and maybe I was like, eh. But there were other things that I was like, oh, this is fantastic, and I want to make sure that people hear about that. So it all started with Reiki, and then we started seeing a biomagnetic paratherapist, and we did that, and that was another game changer modality. When I say that, we estimate that we were like at 80% when we started finding
Hmm.
alternative things to do. And that for anybody that's in this journey, that last 20%, it's almost the hardest, right? Because
It
it's like,
is.
like you
Absolutely.
feel good most days, but you don't always know when those lousy days are going to creep
Hmm.
in, and you just want the lousy days to go away.
And you feel like you've tried everything under the
Yes,
sun. You're just like, what's left? Whatever I do is going to have to be really big or really out there, or really different to see if it can kind of get
right.
you over the hump. I was similar. I got to about, I'd say like 60, 70% better. And I just kind of plateaued there. Like all my treatments weren't working anymore. So I was like, okay, I got to do something
Yeah.
big, something drastic. So I actually ended up doing stem cells, and that ended up
Hmm.
being what magically healed me.
Yes.
But it's always interesting to see what people's like kind of final piece of the puzzle
Hmm.
is to their
Yeah, for
healing.
sure. For sure. Um, so we did Reiki, and we did biomagnetic therapy. And then, of course, I went and I learned both of those modalities. And one of the nice things was that I learned how to do distance sessions. because we all know what happened in 2020. And we had a brick and mortar healing studio in San Diego. And as thankfully luck would have it, our lease was up in March of 2020, and we were just about to sign another lease, and then this all hit. And at first they were saying it's just going to be 2 weeks. Well, in the medical world, you know that if they're talking pandemic, we're talking at least 2 years. So we gave up our lease, and I had a couple of clients that I had been working with virtually all along. So, I continued to work with them. And then other people were, connecting with me saying, Amanda, what else can we do? Because they were working with me faithfully at the Healing Center. And I'm like, everything that I offer, I can do virtually. And at first it was like, really? And then, people really started to come around, because I think one of the things that the pandemic taught us was how much we could do remotely, how much we could do over Zoom and, just through energy medicine. I mean, that's what it is. It's energy medicine. You don't necessarily have to be physically touching each other for these modalities to work. So, during the pandemic, that's when I finished up my herbalism, certification, my holistic health certification, because what was happening was I was having more and more people kind of use me as that one-stop shop, right? They were like, oh, you understand Lyme, you understand protocols, but legally I could not guide people on that because it wasn't part of my certification, and I'm fully insured, and, I make sure I'm doing everything on the up and up. And so when I got those certifications, I was able to start working with people in that realm. And then, of course, continued to do different energy medicine things. I learned emotion code because I felt like there was something missing for emotions for people. And what do you do when you identify these emotions? How do you remove them? So I went and I learned emotion code, and then somatics, of course, has become such a big, important piece to the puzzle. And we've really recognized that the last few years. So what I do, Erica, in a session is I just meet the client where they're at. Where are they? What are the things that they could change? If there was anything they could change, what would it be? And then we make a plan of how we're going to get there. And I like to teach people, things that they can do in between sessions. So it's not just you're only healing when you're in session. I want people to have tools so that when we're not in session, they don't feel like they don't know what to do. They always have a plan of what to do. I'm a real believer in that. Absolutely. And I offer modalities that address not just physical, because most of us, that's the first thing we address. We address physical things. But I also like to make sure that we're talking about the energy system of the body, the emotional system of the body, and also the spiritual side. And that doesn't necessarily mean religion, right? But there's great spirituality that comes with healing and connecting with that part of ourselves. And I address that with people as well.
Awesome. And then you're also an herbalist. So do you work with recommending herbs that can support people with the energy healing as well? Do you do any energy work with the herbs?
Yeah. So when I'm working with people and I'm making herbal recommendations, it's very much an intuitive thing for me. I mean, going and learning about all the herbs through a program, it was really just, I already kind of knew that, right? But it's a very intuitive process when I'm choosing the recommendations that I make. And I also, I talk to the client, what do they feel comfortable with? Because in this journey, what works for one won't work for another at all. So it's so individualized.
If it could be that easy, it'd be so much easier for people to recover and heal, right?
Well, and that's the tricky thing that, I say with Lyme, and anybody that's worked with me, they've heard this little spiel. But Lyme, healing it is a blessing and a curse, because there's so many different ways to heal, and that's a blessing. But there's so many different ways to heal, and that can be a curse, because it takes that perfect combination of things to help somebody get to the point where they feel like they're healed. And healed doesn't necessarily mean that Lyme has gone away and you never have to deal with it again, right? Because we know that right now the word cure is not something that's synonymous with Lyme. But we can use words like remission. We can use words like strong remission or I've healed from it. And I like to give people the tools to say, okay, if you're having a day where you're starting to feel like things are creeping up a little bit, here's what to do. Because I monitor, like as we're doing things, I'm watching what worked for that client, right? And I mark it. So as things move along, they don't forget because I remind them. Now, remember, if you're feeling, like the moon is bothering you, here's your toolbox that worked for you at that time, right? I really like to help support people
Absolutely.
in that way.
Awesome. And then, so, out of all the clients that you've worked with, what are some of the most amazing success stories that you've seen? Can you
Mm,
share any dramatic results that you
yeah,
can
one
share?
of my favorite ones, and I still have the text. I had a client who her goal was that she wanted to feel well enough to take her children on a trip to Ireland. And they rented one of those covered wagons and they did the country in covered wagons.
Oh my gosh.
And
Wow.
she sent me a text from the airport and she was just expressing her gratitude about how she never thought she was going to get to that point. And, she also had a lot of anxiety being around a lot of people. So being at the airport was a big thing. And she says, I'm sitting here in an airport with all of these people about to go on this magical trip. And I wouldn't have been able to do it without you. And not to feed my own
Aw.
ego, but I was crying because
Yeah.
I was so happy for
Aw.
her because all each of us needs is somebody to believe in us and tell us like this can be done and help hold us up when we're having those rough days. And I love doing that for people. So I was so happy for her. And they had an amazing trip. And I was able to hear about it and see pictures. And yeah, it was amazing.
Amazing. And then, so when you work with someone and you're putting together kind of a treatment plan for them, do you mostly use Reiki for it, or do you use some of the other modalities? And how many sessions before people start to see
Mm,
a shift in how they're feeling, and
yeah,
how long is kind of a treatment plan in
such a
general?
great question. Well, of course, everybody's different. I was going to say that, right? It really
Yes.
depends so much of the time, Erica, where they are from a headspace perspective, right? Some people, they just feel really beaten down by this whole thing. So we have to do a lot of work around mindset and, just creating some mindfulness practices around that, different things that, and of course, things that resonate for them. If, I tell people that if I make a suggestion and you're like, ugh, don't be afraid to tell me that, right? But
Yeah.
most of the time, we will find something pretty quickly that is on the mark that gets them going in a different direction. And it's definitely not always energy work. I find a majority of people, we're starting by talking about the physical stuff because that's just how we are as human beings. We want
Mhm.
to feel a little bit better physically before we start letting ourselves go into paying attention to the emotional, to the spiritual, all those other parts. I would say most people I work with, I wouldn't say in terms of number of sessions, but I would say maybe at least a few months of working together. And that's usually every couple of weeks at least that we're working
Okay.
together.
Okay.
So, usually in the first session, we're kind of generating a plan. What are we looking at? What are we paying attention to? We're getting to know each other a little bit. And then, in subsequent sessions, maybe we're doing some energy work, maybe we're doing some somatic practices to kind of help them build their toolbox to calm the limbic system, because goodness knows that limby can be very anxious for some of us, just working
Absolutely.
on all those different things. So I would say at least a few months, but I do have clients that I've been working with for years. And, there's some of the people that just, they needed more support, and that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And then, have you worked with people, say, like autoimmune conditions or something that's a little bit more quantifiable? So, with Lyme, the testing is so inaccurate, can't even tell you half the time if you have an active infection, and much less if you've treated and, are in remission or have less infection. Like, there's no way to really track the results. But say, like an autoimmune disease, say maybe like Hashimoto's, where you can test your antibodies and see if this kind of therapeutic work is helping, kind of like you said, reset your limbic system, reset
Yeah.
your like autoimmunity and system. Have you ever had clients that you work with that you've been able to kind of quantify results on paper as well as how they're feeling?
Yeah, so what I do is, because I'm not a physician, what I do is I always encourage people to continue working with, if they feel good with their physician, continue working with them. But it's always interesting to see as we're employing some of the things that I do, maybe they weren't doing anything like that before, and they were kind of only doing the more medical stuff, right? And then we're starting to add some of that energetic stuff. Yes, people do see improvements. I find, especially when I think two things make the biggest difference: when we're starting to address the limbic system and the nervous system of the body, and getting the body out of that constant fight or flight, which we know we're not going to be able to get somebody completely out of fight or flight when all this is going on, because our body is wired to protect us when we're not feeling good. But to at least have
Yep.
nice chunks of time where we can calm our nervous system, I think that's one of the most helpful things, and I help people do that. And then just doing some energy work, getting in there. I can see and perceive what's going on inside the energy system of their body and start helping them to shift that energy. That's very helpful, because I find that people's medications will work better, their supplements will work better, they are sleeping better, which is so important. I find sleep hygiene is often missed or
Yeah.
ignored altogether in this journey. And if we,
That can be such a hard one with
yes,
Lyme too. I mean, I remember when I had Lyme, I was like so tired all day, and then I would have the worst insomnia,
yes,
and I would sleep, but I would never feel rested. So, like, helping people, I think, get into that rest and repair
absolutely.
state, however you can do it, I think is super helpful
Yeah, and I
too.
very often teach people Reiki hand positions that they can do on themselves when they're not sleeping that will stimulate sleep. There's certain hand positions that you can
I
do.
might need those.
Right, right. But yeah, I just love it. I love helping people and just seeing the work starting to really take hold, and it is quantifiable. When they're able to work with their doctor, and then they get their blood tests done, say 6 months later, and it's like, oh, I'm sleeping better, my thyroid is functioning better, my hormone levels are leveling off. Cortisol, right? When people are doing cortisol testing, the saliva test
Yep.
in the tubes, I don't know if you've done that one,
Yep.
but
Yep. I've done
yeah,
those
of
a couple
course.
times.
But all of a sudden it's like, oh, my cortisol levels are where they should be at whatever the given time of day is, which, is affecting them sleep wise. They're able to sleep better. And it's always just wonderful to see people. I love it when people can go back to work, right? Because so
Yes.
many people, that they
Yes.
feel so bummed out because they had to give up a career or some job that they really, really liked. And now they're at home and they're in bed and they don't feel good about that. And when people can go back to doing something that really lit them up, it's really exciting. And I
Hmm.
have had plenty of clients that have been able to do that. Yeah,
That's awesome. And then, so you mentioned the pandemic. Do you also work with people that have been struggling with like long COVID? And
every
do you
day.
see a lot of overlap? I mean, to me, long COVID sounds like Lyme. And I know there's one practitioner that I follow that was getting a lot of long COVID victims or like patients
Hmm.
afterwards. And she was testing them all for tick-borne disease, and they were all testing positive. So I think there's a real
Yeah.
connection that maybe people, like a lot of times people can walk around and have tick-borne infections, but their body's kind of keeping up.
Hmm.
You get an infection, brings you down, everything kind of comes out to play and have a party in your body, which, even though they weren't
Right.
invited.
It's true.
So, what have you seen like a parallel with that?
Yeah.
Common with tick-borne disease? Did those people end up testing for tick-borne disease, or what kind of patterns
For
have you seen in
sure.
that world?
What I have seen is reactivation. People that were
Mm-hmm.
in what we were considering a remission from Epstein-Barr, from shingles. I have one client that just was always getting shingles. We finally got things to calm down, got COVID, here comes shingles again, right? It's like I find that COVID is like the great reactivator of everything that was going on. And it's just, and the mast cell activation syndrome, COVID is brutal when you get that, and there's mast cell involvement. So yeah, I've found that there's a lot of reactivation, and some of the healing from that is just giving it time, for the immune system
Mm-hmm.
to come back online and to work some of it out. But there are system supports that, I've suggested for people, in terms of supplementation and things to get back on par. I mean, I know I've had my own COVID journey. I think
Mm-hmm.
most people at this point have had it. Um, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I
I got it for the first time in January. It was good for
yeah,
like 4 years, and then I finally got it, but it was pretty mild. Thankfully, I was
yeah,
lucky.
for
So
sure. Yeah, and I think too, they're getting better at knowing what is helping. And, just like Lyme, there seems to be different camps of thought behind all of it. But we are starting to find that there are some supplements that help to restore things that the body may have lost during a bout of COVID. But it can take time for sure. And I would say, between Lyme and long COVID, those are probably the things that I work with the most. I do see some people, I help a lot of parents who have children with Lyme disease, with autism, different long-term things. I work with that a lot. I have some clients that have MS, because MS, of course, there are some things about MS that are very similar to Lyme. So, yeah.
Yeah. And depending whose school of thought you follow with that, some theories are that MS is all just late stage
Right.
Lyme. And I know Dr. Klinghardt has done like a lot of studies and tests that he's never had an MS
Didn't
patient
have
that didn't
Lyme.
test positive for
Right.
Lyme. So it's like you have to wonder how many of these other conditions like rheumatoid arthritis
Mm-hmm.
and lupus and all these other conditions are really just underlying Lyme, and we just don't have the right testing
Right.
to test for it and diagnose people properly. And plus, Lyme is just such a controversial disease,
It
anyways.
really
So,
is.
um,
And I'll admit, like I know all the theories that are out there, and all the, some of them sound very much conspiracy theory. I have some belief in just about everything that I hear out there, but at the end of the day, I don't get too involved in that, because
yeah,
it doesn't help my client who's, sitting on the other side of a Zoom camera crying because they're going through this horrific time. It's like, we don't need to go through, all of the, the island off of Connecticut, and we don't need to get into all
yeah,
of that. And I know that there are already people that are going through those battles. They're exposing
hmm
those things, and that's great. The one thing that I have done the last 2 years is I've participated in the Lyme fly-in, going to Congress, trying to get funding for education, for better diagnostics, testing, research, because it's so important. This is not
yeah,
a condition that is going away. And my whole thing is, I want everybody to just stop arguing about it. Let's admit that there is something going on. There's no denying, even for doctors that don't believe in
absolutely.
Lyme, they can't deny that there is something going on with these patients. But so many of us, and we could talk about medical gaslighting as a whole separate,
Oh my
um,
gosh,
a
don't get me
whole
started on that
separate
one.
episode. But when I hear about gaslighting, just about every client that I work with has a
hmm
gaslighting story. And, so I give people,
Absolutely.
like, I tell people, don't go to the doctor and say, I suspect that I have Lyme disease. Go to the doctor and ask to be tested for a Borrelia infection. There's something about shifting terminology that some doctors
hmm
respond to that better than going in and saying
Interesting.
Lyme disease, right? So, I coach people along on, especially if they don't know yet if they have Lyme. I mean, everything certainly lines up, but because I'm not a physician, I can't diagnose. I mean, there have been times where
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, they have Lyme. But, we send
Yeah.
them to a Lyme literate practitioner. That's, the way to go. Get connected with a Lyme literate practitioner, because they can make a diagnosis off of symptoms. Lyme is something that you do not need a positive test in order to get a diagnosis, which is important. And I think that's a testament to the fact that the testing is so inaccurate. I know that, for me, I feel that the gold standard test is IGeneX. Their tests, are about as accurate as you can get. So I tell people,
Yeah.
if you have the funding, that's the test to get.
hmm
But
Yep, IGeneX or Vibrant Lab seems like it's come a long ways now too, and has pretty in-depth testing for a variety of different strains. Because it's like there's 300 strains of Lyme and
right,
Borrelia, and there's it's all these. So you may not have Borrelia burgdorferi, but you have Borrelia Miyamoto, and
exactly,
it's like the test isn't going to pick that up. And then if you go to like just your LabCorp test, that's certainly not going to pick up anything.
right,
That's already proven that it misses 50% of Lyme cases.
yeah,
So plus, if you test too soon, too, right? So, say someone gets a tick bite, gets the rash, you 100% have Lyme if you got the
Mm-hmm.
rash. You go to your doctor and they're like, test you. Oh, you're negative,
Right.
and or they give you like 1 day or 10 days of antibiotics and you think you're good to go, and 2 3 months later you're like, why can't I think as well, like why do my joints
Right.
hurt? And you're never going to put two and two together until years later, and at that point it's you're done so much damage to your body, it's so hard to get yourself out of
Mm-hmm.
that. So just building awareness with our doctors, building awareness that the testing is inaccurate, and like you said, finding a Lyme literate doctor that can help
Mm-hmm.
diagnose based on symptoms. And I think this or more we can educate our doctors to earlier diagnose, the better people are going to be, obviously, because catching it early is so important.
Right.
So at this point, I guess teaching people prevention and awareness is kind of
Oh,
the number one way
right.
to keep people from doing
Right.
that.
Stay
So
away from that long grass, you know. I mean, and
I can't even walk on grass anymore. I'm just like petrified. I'm like, I'm not going to do this
yeah.
again. Like,
Yeah.
because that's the thing. Everyone's like, "Oh, you've had it, so you're immune to it."
No.
No, like you can get it all over again with a whole other set of fun, lovely infections.
Right.
And yeah, I learned my
Right.
lesson.
Well, and that's the thing. I think it was last year, maybe, I can't remember what month it was last year, but that report came out that they were testing ticks that they were finding in seagrass on California beaches, and like
Mhm.
so many
Yeah,
of them, they were picking up
yeah,
Lyme, so then, some of the people in my circles were like, I'm not going to the beach. I'm like, no, 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 no. We can't avoid living, right? Just stay away from the grass that's on the beach, right?
exactly, exactly.
It's a lot of mindset work to feel comfortable to go back in the world again and go hiking and different things, because a lot of people, we loved to hike. I mean, I lived in New England. I was in the mountains constantly. So I'm quite certain I was bitten by a tick and didn't know it. My husband also he grew up in Vermont. I mean, it's just, there's ticks everywhere. Um,
Yeah.
but we didn't have the education 20 years ago that
Hmm.
I don't even think we have the education we need now, which is
No, only we
right.
do. Only the people that have had Lyme had the
That's
education.
right.
We're like preaching to everyone, like, hey, you have to, you have to pay
Right.
attention to this. And hopefully, I always say, like, if I can save at least one person from going through what I went through, I'll feel like my job is done in the world. But I'm hoping to reach a lot more than
Yes,
that.
absolutely. Well, that's why I think, I'm trying to go on as many podcasts as I can and just keep talking to
Mm,
people, because I think, like you, if I can just reach that one person who, maybe they're having all these symptoms, they're getting bounced around to all these specialists, and,
yep.
but they didn't think to even ask for a Lyme test. And, for us, when we had been tested through, just your regular ELISA that you get at the doctor's office. And we were begging them to test using the IGeneX test, because, that was the one that we were like, everybody was saying to go and get. And
Yeah. That's the one I tested positive
yeah,
on. So it's the one that finally
yep.
caught it for me.
And the doctor, when we asked, the doctor looked at my husband and said, I'll sign for you to have this test. But when it comes back negative, will you finally admit that there's nothing wrong with you? It's like,
Wow.
what?
Wow.
So yeah,
That's awful. Did it come back
yeah,
positive?
yeah.
And
We
what the
left
doctor
and we
say?
went. We ended up going and working with a naturopath, and we.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of us in this realm, we stopped going to conventional medicine doctors for anything except
Hmm.
the absolute, the annual
Yep.
physical, right?
Lab test.
Your
Yeah.
cholesterol test, like, your
Uh-huh.
standard stuff. But for everything else, we pretty
Yep.
much go to naturopaths for that.
Same.
Yeah, yeah,
Me too. Yep. They're the only ones that are doing things that are actually helping people.
right.
So, and like, yeah, I have all this expensive health insurance. My health insurance can pay for any Lyme treatment. So I pretty much have it for like an emergency
Yeah.
or, testing, like, like basic
Mm-hmm.
testing.
Oh, the
So
financials
it's
of
pretty
Lyme.
frustrating that our world is so
Yeah,
warped.
the financials of Lyme. That again, a whole nother episode we could do on that. But I
It is
mean,
a whole other
it
episode.
that was a whole nother piece of this whole
Yeah.
thing. But yeah,
Well, awesome, Amanda. Thank you. It's been so great having you on the
thank
podcast.
you.
I'd love to have you share a little bit about your practice and how people can find you. I know that you offer a 30-minute intro
I
session as well. So if you
do.
want to share a little bit of information on how people can work
Sure. Yeah,
with you as
thank
well.
you. So my website is Dahl Holistic Health, and it's DAHL. and then holistic with an H, dahlholistichealth.com. And like Erica mentioned, I do offer a free 30-minute Zoom call. If somebody is interested in working together, that is the best way to start. It's pretty much how I start with everybody. And then we just go from there. We start, making a plan. I also am on Instagram. My handle is Dahl Holistic Health, and you can search me on YouTube. I do have a few YouTube videos out there, and I'm really getting into doing more YouTube work.
Yeah, seems to be the way
I
to
love the long
go.
form.
Doing a lot of video
Yeah, I feel
content.
like I'm a very verbose person. I love to talk to people and I love to explain things because I know for me, one of the things that the gifts of Lyme is that I'm a very slow processor. So I like to hear things presented long form and in different ways. So I'm really finding that's resonating with me as a way to be able to share information with people. So I'm kind of building up
Awesome.
YouTube in that way. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I look forward to seeing more
Yeah,
videos from
thank
you.
you. And I did want to mention too that I
Awesome.
have a free guide. If any of your listeners would like to go and grab that, it's on dollholistichealth.com/guide. And it's practical ways to kickstart your healing journey. And it's perfect for the people who maybe they're stuck, need some new ways of looking at things. It'll kind of give you a little guide of some things that you can do more DIY to get you started.
Awesome. And we'll link to everything in the show notes too, so it'll be in there with the right
Yeah,
place to go. So
excellent.
amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Amanda. It's been a
Yeah,
pleasure chatting
thanks.
with
You too,
you, and
Erica.
I look forward to
Thank
following
you.
your
You
journey.
too.
Thank you.